In the name of God, our liberation. Amen. Please be seated. Excuse me. When I was growing up, my father's side of the family would often, whenever we gathered, sing songs together. Those were some of my favorite memories of my teen and young adult years. We'd sing hymns and folk songs and children's songs and whatever else might come to mind on any given evening through the haze of abundant, delicious, unhealthy food, and usually a little liquid lubrication as the night passed. I'll never forget bringing a friend from Maine home with me to central Louisiana one time, and the joy we all felt as she experienced a depth of culture shock she never knew was possible. She usually watches our live stream here, or at the least checks out my sermons on the blog each week, so hi, Rebecca. But for Rebecca, culture shock has a theme song, one that she'd remind me of for years after that trip. It was the Crawdad song. The lyrics were, "You get a line, I'll get a pole, honey. You get a line, I'll get a pole, babe. You get a line, I'll get a pole, we'll all go down to the crawdad hole, honey, baby mine." This was my family. It's been a long time since I've been to one of those family gatherings. I suppose they still do these sing-alongs. But regardless, it helped to shape who I am today. And every now and then, one of those songs will make its way in front of me again, and I'll be transported back to those years all over again. This week, it was one of our favorites that came up every time we sang together, me and Bobby McGee. I thought of that song because the overarching theme we hear in these stories about Jesus, both the story of the Syrophoenician woman and the story of the man who was deaf and impeded in his speech, they both bring up themes of healing. But through healing, these two find freedom. Janis Joplin sang that freedom's just another word for nothing left to lose. But that can be a sort of cynical way to look at freedom. Having nothing left to lose can be a sort of freedom, but for these two, and for so many people who follow Jesus, freedom means regaining something that's been lost. For the Syrophoenician woman, she came seeking healing for her daughter, and she got that. But in the process, she also found freedom from her status as a lesser person. It's always almost painful to hear this interaction. Jesus comes across as harsh, reserving his liberation for his own kind. And she didn't even deny the bias that he expressed. She claimed it and she owned it. But even so, even through that fog of bias, she claimed to be worthy. Even the dogs under the table eat the children's crumbs, she said. Aren't I at least as good as those dogs? Don't I at least deserve the crumbs? It's hard to hear Jesus, the great liberator, speaking that way. But even so, the woman does leave liberated. Not just because her daughter was healed, but because she claimed her own empowerment. She held firm in the face of all that was being thrown at her. And the liberation doesn't stop there. The disciples saw this whole thing. They saw Jesus refuse her, but then they saw Jesus recognize and celebrate her empowerment. "For saying that, you may go," he said. "The demon has left your daughter." Jesus' followers saw how grace could be extended beyond the bounds that they'd previously thought. They were liberated from their own bias. They were liberated to see that God's grace and love can't be contained within the confines of human prejudice. Maybe that was the point all along. Maybe Jesus needed to identify the social limitations that everyone around him assumed, so the woman herself and the disciples around him could all see that God was offering another way, a way of freedom for everyone, not just the select few who'd been born into it, the few who believed that they deserved it. The next story of healing is when Jesus meets the man who is deaf and whose speech is impaired. Jesus takes him off to a place where they can be alone. This one didn't need an audience, I guess. We're told about the ritual he performed and the magic words he said. Then the gospel tells us immediately his ears were opened and his tongue was released and he spoke plainly. I love that image. He had been closed off and bound. But after meeting Jesus, he was opened up and freed. That's my dream for the church and for everyone who interacts with us. It's that every person who meets Jesus here will find their own piece of the freedom of Christ, and that through that freedom, they will be opened and unbound, free to hear more clearly, free to speak more plainly. That that free and clear hearing is how we grow. And that free and clear speaking is how we help others to grow. Later in the song, Janice sings, "Nothing don't mean nothing, hon, if it ain't free." That's a little less cynical. And it makes the first line make a little bit more sense. We can hold fast to whatever we want, but without freedom, it doesn't mean anything. To be truly free, all we need is freedom. Not all that other stuff that weighs us down. And that's the gift that Jesus offers again and again. The gift of healing and freedom. In a world so sick and bound with oppression and prejudice, those are pretty good gifts. In a world filled with Syrophoenicians who are constantly told that the good things of this world aren't for them, Christ's healing and freedom are desperately needed. In a world filled with people who are deaf to the love of God, and a church too often impaired in our speaking to others about the love of God, being opened and unbound is a gift we need at a time like this. The love of Christ is freedom. It is healing balm. And it is freely offered to us all, whomever we are. However unworthy we think we are, or however unworthy we think anyone else is. It's spread to the very edges and beyond. It overflows. The liberating love of Christ overflows beyond any bounds that we can give it. It can't be contained by us or by anyone or anything else. It is free, and it frees us. Amen.